What's up, guys? Today I'm going to show you my process of how I go about mounting different seats into different vehicles. In an effort to get rid of my old track car, I went ahead and reinstalled that motor that I did the compression test on. It's running great now, but now I'm working on trying to get some seats into it. I didn't have anything for it. And I had these two Prelude seats. These are out of the 97 to 01 Prelude. And I originally bought these for my 94 Toyota pickup. They were nice for the fitment. I'd measured them when I was at the junkyard one day, but I never ended up installing them. I've had them sitting in my garage for about 3 years now. And I knew I was never going to use these seats in any of my other cars. I don't need them. So I want to throw them in here just to help with the value because they're a really nice looking seat and they're in very good shape. I have this one mounted up already. So let me show you what it takes and the process I go about removing the brackets on the seat and then re-welding them into position. I wanted to share this process because I've had a lot of people ask me how I mounted those Integra Type R seats into the 90 Civic. When my friend Gabe owned it, he had those ITR seats and I ended up removing the brackets and re-welding them back on for him so they would fit in there, and I've never really had any pictures of it, so I wanted to kind of show you exactly what I do. First off, when getting seats for your car, if they're from a Honda or Acura, some sort of Integra or Civic, the brackets in the front are usually very similar. The only difference is going to be the spacing between this bolt hole and this bolt hole. So sometimes we can just possibly remove one and either shift it to the right or left a little bit, then re-weld it. But you have to really pay attention to the rears because, say for instance, on this particular seat, let me bend it up a little bit. You see how the bracket is flat? This is the outside of the passenger seat, and the inside is also flat. So those flat brackets, this one will not work in this particular car because in all of the EF hatchbacks, you have the two front ones which mount down. This one in the corner is flat, but this one right here is also at an angle, so that flat bracket right here will not work. And so what I have off of a different seat, I will cut off brackets, that way I can use them for future use. So when I remove the bracket off it, I'll have one that mounts appropriately and I can just weld the rail to this particular bracket now. So that's something you may need to acquire if, well, it just really depends on what kind of seat you get. And here you can see I bolted up the outer passenger rail. Now the inner one, you can see how far off it is. The hole is like right back behind this area. So that one will not work. So we're gonna need to remove that bracket for sure. But what I always do, I remove this bracket, I remove this mount, and I also remove the rear mount. And the reason I do that is because I find it easier to start with the inner one on the rear. You can see over here, this one, I didn't have to do any sort of modifications. I just started with that. And then from there, once the other three were grinded off, I would kind of move the seat around into position as this one is now. And then start with the first bracket. We weld it on, test fit it, reposition it, go to the one in the front, test fit, weld it, test fit again, and then go to the rear, add the last one, throw a little paint on them, and mount it up. And using either a grinder or some sort of cutting disc, you're going to need to remove all of these little studs which mount the brackets to the rails. There's two here on that one. Looks like we have one on this side. And on that last outer one, we have two more here. Just don't forget to leave the inner one alone. That's the one we're starting with the mounting of the entire seat. Now what I did right there was just grind down the remainder of the little nubs that were in there. Here's an example of what I just removed. So you want to get those flat because when we put these on here, you want to make sure you have a flat mounting surface. So just grind those down, plus it cleans up the area. And I'll also clean it up depending on where I'm going to weld, because the cleaner it is, the better the weld will be, and the better it'll lay down on there, especially with the type of weld I'm using. Now we're going to take the seat, we're going to bolt up this first one, and we're going to test fit where we want to move the bracket around depending on where it lines up in the car. So let me get this put into the car real quick and I'll show you. So what I'll do first, I'll go ahead and put this in its position, and then I'll just thread the bolt in a little bit. It doesn't need to be completely tight because you do want to be able to move the seat around like back and forth so we can line it up straight where it sits in the car. So let me slide it all the way back. And how I mean with that, like you don't want this side, you don't want facing in too much or out too much. That way you can kind of start with this bracket and just kind of get it straight. Like if you look at this one, it's very straight. I made sure I did that when I mounted this rail first. And you can see how it slid over here. I know the lighting's not the best, but I'm hoping you can catch that. Where the weld is, you can see how far I slid the bracket over. So we're gonna essentially do the same, try to keep the seat as straight as possible. And that looks pretty good right there. And then we wanna put this bracket on. I'm gonna lift the chair right now, and I'm just gonna bolt it in, and then we're gonna see where the rail lays on top of the bracket. Okay, and I got it bolted down. This one I went in a little further, just so the bracket doesn't move much. And then when you lay the seat down, I'm gonna go ahead and mark it off, and then I'm gonna clean it, and then I'm gonna re-weld it. So I like this positioning. It seems to be straight with the driver's seat. And looking at the rail, yeah, it looks straight as the driver's side does. So that's why it's just a little bit of test fitting back and forth, and it could be tedious, but the results are definitely worth it once I get it in. So let me get this all removed, and then I'm gonna get it out and grind down all the black paint off of the bracket and the rail where I'm going to weld. And I'll weld across the front and down both sides, and then on the rear, just to get it as solid as possible and throw as much weld on there as I can. See, now with all the areas cleaned off, I can go ahead and weld it, and we'll get some nice solid welds. What I'll use next, I have a C-clamp. I'm gonna use a C-clamp to hold it in position because it's hard to weld these two pieces, trying to hold it and then hold the welding handle at the same time. So I'm gonna C-clamp it where I'm happy with it, and I've kind of eyeballed it and remembered where I needed it. So I'm just gonna do a small weld, that way if I need to break it off, I can re-weld it and remove it. And here I just put a small amount on here, that way if I need to reposition it, I can get it off really easily. And I'm using my Harbor Freight. This is a 90 amp, it's a flux core wire welder. It's not the prettiest welds, but it gets the job done for stuff like this that you're never really gonna see. So what I need to do now, let's put it back into the car and test fit the first and second bolt hole position. And go ahead and re-bolt the back bolt, and then see if you can get your front one on. And it looks like I had no issues at all where I lined it up. I'm just gonna go ahead and finish off welding all the way around and reinforcing it as much as possible. But these two are done. Now I'm gonna finish welding this bracket completely on. What I like to do to protect the material, when I first did just a little small piece, I didn't put this up there, but I'll put a piece of cardboard in here. I'll usually cut a small slit and I'll just slide it right down. That way you can protect the material from any splash damage from the flux core. That way, because I'm gonna be going at it pretty heavily, I don't have to worry about it damaging the seats at all. So that makes a nice little shield, so it'll just hit that and fall straight to the ground. And here's a look at that bracket finished up. Welded across the front, the side. You see how this welder, it's not the prettiest, but it's solid here. The way I got that weld laid down. I even did it along the back and underneath where there was like holes from the original rivets on these. I welded through to the metal on the bracket there just to reinforce it as much as possible. So it's on there now, and I don't think I'll have any issues with it. I've done this about 4 times in the past on different cars and never had an issue with the strength of these, and I've never had one break off. And now we need to work on this other rail. So go ahead and bolt up the 2 brackets, the front and the rear, and then make sure this rail is pushed all the way back, or at least even with the other side, because I pushed the seat all the way back. I wanted to see where it sat. Now, an issue I encountered with this particular seat is the way it sits in this car. It was sitting a little lower towards the outer edge of the car, towards the door. So to alleviate that, on, say, this mount, if I put it here, see how there's a little bit of space in between? Obviously I can push it down, but that's gonna kind of bend the seat down a little bit. Let me show you what I'm gonna do with this side and what I already did with the other side. Now what I'm gonna do to offset that space is I'm gonna use a little chunk of steel. This has gotta be like a 1/4 inch thick by 2 inches. I'm gonna weld it to the bracket, if I can get it to stay. Then I'm gonna weld the seat on top of that. Let me show you the driver's side so I can give you an idea of how that looks. And you can see right here exactly what I did. The bracket, that little chunk of metal, and then the rail welded to the metal. And that made this particular seat, it made it sit level, so that way the outer side wasn't lower. It just felt a little weird when I first put it in and was sitting in it. So that's something I always try to check. And the reason I do that, the first time I ever mounted a different set of seats into a car was a set of 94 to 01 Integra seats into a 91 Civic hatch, and that one sat a little bit in on the inside. I got used to it, but it just felt a little weird at first, and I never ended up straightening it out because it was minimal, but I was just being really picky about it. So that's what I'm going to do on this side. The rear, I didn't have to do that once I got the bracket welded onto the rail. And so just the front and this corner needs to be lifted slightly to make this particular seat sit level in the car. And from the rear, here's what I mean by sitting level. As you can see on the sides of the steering wheel and just looking at it from a level plane, it sits straight up and down. There's no lean to the left or right. And so, similar to what I did on the other rail over there, go ahead and kind of mark it off where you like it. Move your bracket around. I'm going to put the bracket in and bolt it down, and then kind of fit everything where I like and get it welded up. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off the last 2. I think you guys kind of have a general idea of how to get these mounted now, or at least how I do it. Then I'll show you the end result. See in here I got the mount welded. Now that the rail is matching up, it's maybe off by like 2 millimeters when I push it down. So I'm just going to mark that off and weld that, and this bracket will be finished. And lastly, we can just move on to the rear one and be finished with these. I'll throw a little bit of paint over them when I'm done, just so they look a little bit cleaner as I did the driver's side. And here it is, guys. I got all of them finished up. Got the last one put on there, and I ended up putting some black paint on it just to kind of make it look a little nicer. So now I'm going to bolt it up in the car, and we are finished with this job. And here it is, all complete. So I hope that helps you guys. It's kind of a tedious process. This entire working on both seats from beginning to end, it probably took me about 4 hours, 5 hours, because of all of the back and forth with measuring, lining it up, and then grinding off all the brackets. The bracket grinding off is actually really easy. It's just mainly the measuring back and forth, which is a little bit time consuming, especially if you want them to sit well inside the car. But that's it for today, guys. Hope you liked the info. Hope it helps you guys out in case you're trying to find some decent seats, especially since a lot of these 88, 91 Civics and CRXs, we all know that that bolster is usually just gone. And then sometimes the passenger side goes as well. So great alternative to trying to find some seats to replace. And I picked these up at the junkyard for only $20 each. I spent about $45 after tax, which isn't that much. It's just you spend a little bit of time banking the brackets and you got a nice looking set of seats. Thanks for watching today, guys. I'll see you next time.